This is the story of Arthur Davies, a man whose steady, dependable presence made him easy for his own daughter to overlook. On Father's Day, that indifference was laid bare. A luxurious cruise package for her father-in-law, Robert Sterling, and a handful of cheap scratch-off lottery tickets for Arthur. What began as a moment of quiet humiliation became the catalyst for a life-altering transformation. The joke gift yielded a $120 million jackpot, giving Arthur the wealth and, more importantly, the freedom to finally choose his own path, a path that led him far away from his daughter's casual neglect. This is the tale of how a small, petty slight bought one father the biggest win of his life and cost his daughter everything. The humidity of the late June afternoon pressed against the windows of my daughter Clara's suburban home, a familiar, stifling weight that matched the pressure tightening in my chest. This was the annual Father's Day gathering, a meticulously choreographed spectacle of familial obligation and subtle hierarchies. I, Arthur Davies, a man whose life had been one of solid, unglamorous reliability, was about to receive my yearly allotment of my daughter's attention. The main event was unfolding in the pristine, sun-drenched living room. The air smelled of freshly brewed coffee, cinnamon rolls, and the faint, expensive scent of Clara's air conditioning unit working overtime. Seated on the plush, off-white sectional was Robert Sterling, my son-in-law Mark's father, the undisputed champion of the favorite father title. Robert was a man who didn't just walk into a room, he arrived. He was tanned year-round, always dressed in effortlessly stylish, expensive casual wear, and possessed a booming, hearty laugh that could fill a stadium. He was, in short, everything I was not: vibrant, wealthy, and seemingly adored. The gift for Robert was presented first. It was large, resting on the coffee table like a minor monument. The wrapping paper was the first clue to its value: thick, matte, creamy white stock embossed with a shimmering gold anchor pattern. This wasn't cheap stuff from a discount store. This was high-end boutique wrapping, the kind that whispered of four-figure price tags. Clara, her normally guarded expression softened into one of genuine, almost giddy excitement, was hovering over Robert's shoulder as he prepared to open it. "Now, Robert, don't rush," she chirped, a sound I hadn't heard directed at me since she was 8 and wanted to show me a drawing of a lopsided dinosaur. "We took a lot of time picking this out." Robert, ever the showman, pulled the embossed paper away with dramatic slowness. He revealed a sleek, glossy folder and a brochure whose cover featured a photo of a couple sipping champagne on a sun-drenched deck. The bold gold script on the cover read, "7-day Caribbean Cruise, Ultimate Luxury Package." The room, populated by Mark, Robert's wife Eleanor, a woman whose jewelry sparkled even in the shade, and Clara herself, dissolved into a chorus of delighted gasps and applause. "A cruise! You angels! A Caribbean cruise!" Robert exclaimed, his voice thick with emotion. He pulled Clara into a genuine, heartfelt hug, lifting her slightly off the ground. "This is magnificent, Clara. Truly. Eleanor and I have talked about doing this for years. You've made an old man very, very happy." Clara glowed. Her satisfaction was palpable, radiating from her like warmth from a radiator. It was the glow of someone who had successfully demonstrated affection, competence, and generosity to the person she most wanted approval from. I watched this scene unfold from my armchair in the corner, a quiet, almost invisible observer. The cruise, I estimated, was easily a $6,000 to $8,000 gift, a monumental gesture that spoke volumes about Robert's elevated status in his daughter-in-law's mind. The emotional high of the moment made the transition to my gift feel like a sudden, jarring shift in lighting, from a spotlight to a dim, single bulb. My moment arrived about 5 minutes later, after Robert had tucked the cruise brochure into his lap and was deep into a discussion about staterooms with Mark. Clara cleared her throat quietly. She walked across the room, her steps quick and functional, clearly wanting to complete the obligation with minimal fuss. "Oh, Dad, almost forgot," she said, her voice dropping back to its normal, slightly detached tone. She didn't look me in the eye, instead focusing on a stray crumb on the floor. She handed me a small, crumpled envelope. It looked like it had been pulled from the bottom of her purse. There was no wrapping paper, no bow, not even a card. "Happy Father's Day, Dad," she mumbled, giving my shoulder a quick, almost dismissive squeeze, a physical gesture designed to convey closeness without requiring any actual emotional contact. I opened the envelope. Inside were 5 slips of brightly colored, cheap cardstock, scratch-off lottery tickets. 3 were $1 ones, 1 was $2, and the last was a larger, black and gold, $20 million Mega Jackpot ticket that cost $20. Total value, $25. I felt the smile stretch across my face, a practiced, social muscle movement that hid the sudden, sharp, ice-cold sting of humiliation. It wasn't the value of the tickets, I told myself, trying desperately to sound rational in the silent courtroom of my own mind. It was the thought. The thought was apparent. "Here, Dad. Here's a tiny, last-minute gamble that cost less than the coffee Robert is sipping. Try to turn this negligible gesture into something interesting, because I couldn't be bothered to put any real effort into it." Well now, I managed, my voice sounding a little too hearty, a little too false. "Isn't this fun? I love a good scratcher. Maybe I'll win enough to buy a nice dinner out." Clara nodded quickly. "Yeah, I saw them by the register at the gas station this morning. Have fun with those." And just like that, she turned and walked away, drawn back into the orbit of her in-laws, whose expensive gift had purchased a full afternoon of her rapt attention. I sat there, the stiff, cheap lottery papers scratching lightly against the leather of my wallet as I tucked them away. The contrast was a brutal, visible slap in the face. A $6,000 plus 7-day Caribbean cruise for the father of her husband, a gesture of profound respect and affection. And a $25 selection of throwaway scratch-offs for me, the man who had raised her alone after her mother left, who had worked 2 jobs for 20 years to put her through college, who had been there, rock-solid and dependable, every single day of her life. The bitterness was thick in my throat. I wasn't jealous of Robert's wealth. I was jealous of his status in my own daughter's eyes. I had always been the foundation, boring, necessary, and ignored. Robert was the bright, shining star she reached for. I forced myself to stand up, smoothing the front of my shirt. I walked over and joined the group, clapping Robert on the back and offering sincere congratulations on his luxurious impending voyage. I played the part, the supportive, secondary father, the quiet man who knew his place. But beneath the facade, a small, dark seed of resentment had taken root. "They're just tickets, Arthur," I scolded myself internally. "Don't be petty. Don't be a victim." But I couldn't shake the image of the gold anchor and the creamy paper. That paper had a message, and the cheap, crumpled envelope in my wallet had another. And as the conversation continued, swirling with talk of tropical ports and elegant dining, I felt a deep, profound weariness. I just wanted the day to be over. I wanted to be alone with my $25 worth of forgotten hope and my quiet, unacknowledged disappointment. Little did I know, those cheap tickets would be the instrument of my radical escape. I needed to leave. I needed air. I needed to be alone. "I think I'll go clear the grill now," I said to no one in particular, escaping through the back door and into the humid, enveloping silence of the backyard. The lottery tickets rested against my skin, a petty reminder of the day's casual cruelty. I pulled them out, the scratch of the paper a distraction I craved. Might as well get it over with, I thought. Just scratch them off and toss the losers. The sound of the patio door sliding shut behind me was a welcome finality, sealing me off from the overly bright, overly happy noise of the Father's Day gathering. The humid air of the backyard was heavy and still, thick with the scent of charcoal, old lawn clippings, and the faint, residual aroma of expensive cigar smoke, a habit Robert had indulged in earlier, marking his territory like a victorious animal. I stood by the unused gas grill, the last vestiges of my forced smile melting away, replaced by the grim, familiar ache of feeling perpetually overlooked. I needed the quiet. I needed a moment to catalog the injury, to allow the sting of the gift comparison to settle into the scar tissue of past disappointments. It wasn't a lack of love, I knew. Clara wasn't malicious. She was simply busy, and in her world of striving and presentation, I was a finished project. A reliable beige fixture who didn't require effort or flair. Robert, on the other hand, was a trophy father-in-law, a status symbol, a person whose approval she genuinely craved. My hand instinctively went into my wallet, seeking the crumpled paper. I pulled out the 5 lottery tickets. They looked ridiculous out here, cheap and gaudy against the elegant backdrop of Clara's well-manicured lawn and the high-end patio furniture. They were a pathetic physical manifestation of my worth in this house. Might as well get it over with, I thought. Finish the joke. I reached into the small coin pocket of my jeans and pulled out my lucky penny. It wasn't actually lucky in any conventional sense. It was just old and worn smooth, a pre-1982 copper penny that had been in my possession for decades, a smooth, heavy disc that felt comforting between my fingers. I'd used it to scratch every lottery ticket I'd ever bought, which, admittedly, was only about 10 in my entire life. I started with the 3 $1 tickets. I scratched them with a dull, practiced motion, hardly looking. Nothing. 2 tickets were instant losers. The third promised a $5 prize if I matched a single symbol, which I didn't. I tore them into small, satisfying pieces and dropped them into the metal trash can next to the grill. They made a dry, hollow rattle, the sound of insignificant failure. Next was the $2 ticket. I took a little more care with this one, hoping for the free ticket consolation prize. My numbers were 4, 17, 30. The winning numbers were 5, 18, 29. Another piece of useless paper for the bin. The disappointment was minimal, a baseline feeling I was used to. Finally, the $20 million Mega Jackpot ticket. This one was larger, the cardboard stock a bit thicker, the design more dramatic, black and gold, promising fortunes with aggressive, bold typeface. It felt heavy with false promise. I held it for a moment, examining the fine print. Top prize $120 million annuity or $60 million cash lump sum. The numbers were too big to process, too distant from my reality to even feel tempting. They were meaningless statistics. I leaned against the cool metal of the grill, the sounds of conversation and laughter from inside the house barely audible now. I started to scratch the area marked winning numbers. I moved the lucky penny in precise, vertical motions. The first number was revealed, 12. The second, 45. The third, 8. The fourth, 33. For numbers, I moved my attention to the much larger, Your Numbers, section, a grid of 25 squares to be scratched. I started on the top row. The penny scraped against the metallic film. 6. Nothing. 21. Nothing. 37. Nothing. 45. My breath hitched, a small, involuntary intake of air. I stared at the number, the bold 45 foot beneath the scratch-off film looking impossibly clear. It was a $20 ticket, so a match meant something, even a small prize. My heart gave a single hard thump, like a fist hitting a mattress. I tried to slow my hands, the sudden surge of adrenaline making them clumsy. 15. Nothing. 28. Nothing. 12. Match. Another one. My hands were definitely shaking now. This wasn't a joke anymore. 2 matches on a major jackpot ticket. This was a win, maybe a few $1,000s. A few $1,000s was significant to me. It was half the cost of Robert's cruise. The thought twisted in my gut. My whole body went cold. 3 matches. This was impossible. This wasn't how my life worked. My life was defined by the reliable absence of miracles. 40. Nothing. 33. I scratched the film away from the final number in the second row. I stood paralyzed, the air rushing from my lungs. I had matched all 4 winning numbers. I had to be seeing things. The humid air, the stress of the day, the glare on the glossy paper. It had to be an optical illusion. I wiped my palm across my eyes, then looked again. Winning numbers: 12, 45, 8, 33. My numbers: 45, 12, 8, 33. They were all there. The logic of the game was brutal and simple. This meant I had won the prize beneath those 4 match numbers. I flipped the ticket over and consulted the rules again. Match a winning number to your number and win the prize shown below that number. The 4 matched numbers were scattered on the ticket grid, each with a small box below it containing the prize amount. I brought the penny back up, holding it so tightly my knuckles were white. Beneath the first matched number, 45, I scratched gently. The prize amount was revealed: $10,000. My knees felt weak. $10,000. That was a massive, unexpected windfall. It was enough to finally replace my aging car, to fix the roof on my old house before I sold it, to take a nice trip myself. Beneath the second match number, 12, $50,000. I made a sound, a strangled, breathless little choke. $50,000. I sank onto the edge of the patio chair, the metal protesting softly under my weight. $50,000 would be life-changing for me. It was a secure retirement cushion. It was a dream realized. I was no longer the man who got the $25 scratch-off. I was the man who had turned it into $60,000. I didn't want to scratch the last 2. The fear of seeing them revert to a $50 prize, or being told the ticket was void, was overwhelming. But I had to know. The thrill and the terror were a sickening, exquisite blend. Beneath the third match number, 8, $100,000. My vision blurred. $160,000 in total so far. I was hyperventilating, the shallow, quick breaths not bringing in enough air. I felt faint. The world had tilted on its axis. $100,000 was a down payment on a house, a clean slate. I thought of Clara's dismissive gesture, the sheer arrogance of giving me this throwaway ticket. The irony was so immense it was almost comical. I focused on the final match, the number 33. It was located near the bottom of the ticket, slightly isolated from the others. I pressed the worn penny onto the film and scratched away the final layer of metallic dust. The numbers underneath were vast and sprawling, a series of zeros that stretched across the small box, dwarfing the previous amounts. The dollar sign was huge. My eyes struggled to process the magnitude. $120 million. I dropped the penny. It hit the wooden deck with a small, flat clink. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I simply stared at the ticket, the fluorescent pink prize amount burning into my retina. $120 million. The number was meaningless. It was an abstraction, a government statistic, not a personal fortune. I, Arthur Davies, the quiet, ignored, secondary father, had just won more money than Robert Sterling and all his ancestors combined would ever see. The $25 joke gift had blossomed into a colossal, earth-shattering reality. The cruise, the magnificent, costly, envy-inducing cruise, was suddenly less than a rounding error. It was less than a bottle of fine champagne I could now buy on a whim. My first thought, the thought that cut through the shock and the elation, was a cold, quiet realization. They gave me the ticket that set me free. I knew, with absolute certainty, that I couldn't walk back inside and tell them. Not yet. I didn't want the sudden, avaricious attention. I didn't want the forced affection, the awkward attempts to integrate me into their high-status circle now that I was the real prize. The winning ticket wasn't just money, it was the ultimate, undeniable proof of my self-worth, a vindication of my quiet life, and a golden shield against their indifference. I carefully folded the ticket, slipping it not into my wallet, but into the zippered, inner pocket of my jeans, securing it close to my body. I stood up, feeling a dizzying, unprecedented sense of lightness. I had to get out of there. I had to verify this impossible thing. I walked back to the patio door, opening it just enough to peer inside. Clara, Mark, Robert, and Eleanor were still deep in cruise conversation, oblivious. The world had changed completely, but their small, bright room remained exactly the same. "I'm going to run to the corner store for a second," I called out, my voice surprisingly steady. "I need some air and I think we're out of milk." "Okay, Dad, don't be long," Clara replied, her voice distracted. She didn't look up. And I walked out, the man who had arrived ignored and was now leaving as the quietest, most monumental winner in the history of that house. The engine of my old sedan turned over, and I drove away, clutching the ticket, leaving the cheap tickets, the expensive cruise, and the old life behind me. The drive away from Clara's house was a blur of hyperfocus and sensory overload. My old sedan, a beige, 7-year-old Toyota Camry, felt like a sealed escape pod hurtling through space. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached, the winning lottery ticket, my $120 million ticket, pressed deep into the inner zipper pocket of my jeans. The pressure of the paper against my leg was the only thing grounding me to reality. The lie about getting milk was a pathetic shield, and I drove not toward my neighborhood grocery store, but west, toward the next county, a place far enough away that I wouldn't run into anyone who knew me. I needed a neutral zone, a faceless clerk, a quick, impersonal verification to prove that the scratch-off wasn't a cruel, elaborate prank played by the State Lottery Commission. I pulled into a sprawling, brightly lit gas station and convenience store in a small town called Greenleaf. It was busy, which was exactly what I wanted. Anonymity in a crowd. I walked through the automatic doors, the sudden blast of overly conditioned, synthetic vanilla-scented air hitting me like a physical shock. My heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a loud, heavy drum I was sure everyone in the store could hear. I stood in line behind a trucker buying coffee and a young woman arguing with her child over a bag of chips. I meticulously composed my face into an expression of dull indifference, the face of a man just buying gas, maybe a soda. Nothing to see here. I finally reached the counter. The clerk was a young man, barely out of his teens, with earbuds dangling around his neck and a name tag that read, Kevin. He was clearly bored. "Just need you to check this for me, please," I managed, my voice sounding flat and distant, as if it belonged to someone else. I placed the massive, black and gold Mega Jackpot ticket on the counter, making sure my hand didn't tremble. I had decided not to show him the scratched-off prize amounts. I just needed the machine to tell me I wasn't hallucinating. Kevin picked up the ticket without enthusiasm and ran it under the scanner. The first sound was the soft whir of the machine processing the barcode. Then there was silence. A long, agonizing 2 seconds of digital contemplation. Kevin's eyes flicked to the screen above the lottery terminal, then back down to the ticket, his bored expression slowly dissolving into one of perplexed confusion. Suddenly, the store's terminal let out a distinct, high-pitched, insistent sound, WWW. A sound I recognized from every lottery commercial, the major winner alert siren. It was loud enough to make the trucker and the mother turn their heads. The screen on Kevin's terminal flashed a message in large, stark red letters that only he could read. He stared at the screen, then slowly looked up at me, his mouth dropping open. The earbud swung. "Sir," he whispered, his voice cracking with shock. "I can't process this. The machine is telling me it's too big. You have to contact the State Lottery Commission. This is a claims enterprise." He leaned forward conspiratorially, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and disbelief. "What exactly did you win? The screen is flagging it, $100 million or more." I met his gaze, my indifference perfected. "Is that right? Well, that's a surprise. Thanks, Kevin." I reached out, took the ticket back, folded it once, and put it back in the inner pocket. I bought a pack of gum just to complete the pretense of a normal transaction and walked out the door, leaving Kevin staring after me, halfway between dialing his mother and calling a news outlet. I didn't rush back to the car. I walked slowly, deliberately, forcing my mind to stay anchored in the present. It was real. The money was real. $120 million. Back in the car, I sat for a long time in the parking lot. The immense, impossible number finally began to sink its teeth into my reality. This wasn't just fixing the roof or buying a new car. This was financial extinction of worry. This was generational wealth. This was a complete, irreversible, tectonic shift in the landscape of my entire life. The immediate euphoria was quickly choked by a cold, calculating fear. Everyone knows the horror stories, the winners who are swindled, the relatives who descend like vultures, the sudden, public collapse of privacy. I was a man who treasured his quiet life, his anonymity. I didn't want the spotlight, I wanted the freedom the money provided without the chaos it attracted. My next step had to be surgical and secret. I pulled out my phone and did 2 quick searches, bypassing Google for the vetted, specific recommendations from a trusted financial advice forum I frequented years ago, Best Lottery Lawyers, and High Net Worth Fiduciary Services. I spent the rest of the evening, and most of the next day, in a lockdown, frenzied state of planning. I drove 3 hours away to a major metropolitan area and checked into a nondescript, mid-range hotel. I took the phone numbers I found and started making calls. The first call was to a law firm specializing in asset protection and trusts, Henderson and Associates. I identified myself only as Arthur D. and explained my situation in the most clinical, detached language possible. Mr. Henderson, a calm, precise, and reassuring voice on the other end of the line, was immediately professional. His first and most crucial piece of advice was a confirmation of my own instinct. Do not, under any circumstances, tell a single soul. Not your daughter, not your closest friend, not your bank teller. Silence is your armor. His plan was brilliant and immediate. Form an anonymous trust. The Mountain View Trust would be created immediately. This entity, not Arthur Davies, would claim the prize. This would protect my identity from public disclosure. Appoint a trustee. Mr. Henderson's firm would act as the official trustee, collecting the money and handling all public-facing documentation. Choose the payout. He strongly advised the $60 million cash lump sum after taxes, arguing that we could immediately invest and grow that large principal faster than the annuity would pay out, and it would simplify the process. I agreed. The verification process, though already completed at the gas station, needed official sign-off. Mr. Henderson's partner flew out the next morning. I met him in a secure, private conference room. The lawyer examined the ticket with a jeweler's loupe, verified the serial number with the State Lottery Commission over a secured line, and pronounced it absolutely, irrevocably legitimate. As the lawyer slipped the ticket into a sealed, tamper-proof envelope, the finality of the act hit me harder than the initial scratch. The piece of cheap cardboard was gone, replaced by a promise. A massive, life-altering promise. I walked out of that law office a new kind of man. I was still Arthur Davies, wearing the same old clothes, driving the same old car, but internally, I was a secret billionaire. The sting of Clara's indifference, the insult of the $25 scratch-off versus the four-figure cruise, was no longer a source of pain. It was, impossibly, the source of my absolute, undeniable freedom. The realization settled over me. I didn't want the recognition, the fawning, the false affection that would instantly follow the announcement of my win. I didn't want to become Clara's suddenly beloved father, the man she would now showcase and depend on. I had been given a gift of total reinvention, and I intended to use it. The quiet, invisible man was about to vanish, leaving behind only the ghost of the father they thought they knew. The euphoria and panic of the initial verification had settled into a state of profound, cold clarity. I spent the next 3 days sequestered in that anonymous hotel room, not sleeping much, simply thinking, planning, and executing the foundational steps of my new reality. The $120 million wasn't just money, it was leverage, a blank check for absolute freedom. I realized I faced a fundamental choice. I could tell Clara and instantly trade my quiet dignity for the loud, sudden, and temporary affection of a dependent adult. The win would erase her guilt over the cruise/lottery ticket contrast, but it would not erase the underlying truth of her indifference. The forced closeness would, in fact, only magnify the resentment I now felt. I would become the family ATM, the centerpiece of a drama I had no desire to star in. Or, I could choose self-preservation and complete autonomy. The decision wasn't difficult. It was brutally simple. I had been given a clean, sharp break from a life where I was undervalued. I would take it. I would collect the money under the Mountain View Trust, and then I would disappear. My old life was a weight, and I was now light enough to float away. The first week was a whirlwind of logistics, all orchestrated by my new lawyer, Mr. Henderson, who had become a vital, silent partner in my great escape. The trust and payout. The paperwork to formally claim the $60 million cash lump sum after federal and state taxes. It was still an astronomical sum, under the name of the Mountain View Trust, was submitted. Henderson handled everything: the submission, the brief, mandatory press release that mentioned the winner was a private trust from our county, and the careful management of the initial media flurry. Because the trust was structured as a grantor-revocable trust with specific anonymity clauses, my name, Arthur Davies, was nowhere in the public record. I was financially secure and legally invisible. The financial firewall, my financial advisor, Ms. Chin, immediately created a complex structure of offshore and domestic accounts, ensuring that the bulk of the money was actively managed and completely walled off from my previous, ordinary life. My old checking account, retirement savings, and small investments were left to slowly liquidate, creating a convincing paper trail that I was simply winding down my affairs, not becoming a secret millionaire. The hardest part was managing the physical reality of my departure. I needed to sell my home and liquidate my assets without raising any alarm bells, especially with Clara, who lived only 20 minutes away. The house, my small, comfortable house, was my last tether. I didn't want to list it traditionally and endure months of showings and questions. I contacted a national investment firm that specialized in quick cash purchases of residential properties. They offered a low but acceptable all-cash offer. The key was the closing speed. I accepted immediately, with a condition, a 2-week, short-term leaseback after closing. This bought me the crucial time I needed. When Clara called, a rare, unprompted call, usually to ask a favor or invite me to an obligation, I deployed my first major lie. "Dad? What's going on with the realtor sign I saw across the street?" she asked, her tone already tinged with annoyance that I hadn't informed her. "Oh, Clara, I decided to sell the place," I said, keeping my voice mild and measured. "It's too much upkeep. I took a quick cash offer. I'm just simplifying things." "Simplifying? Dad, where are you going to go? You didn't even talk to me about this. Are you planning to move into some tiny apartment?" "I don't know yet, honey. I'm thinking about traveling, clearing my head. I've always wanted to see the national parks, maybe drive the entire Pacific Coast Highway. I'm restless. I need a change." The words restless and change were utterly foreign to my character, which, ironically, made them believable. Clara had always viewed me as a creature of habit, and this sudden, uncharacteristic impulse to wander could only be attributed, in her mind, to a benign, late-life eccentric phase. "Well, please keep in touch," she said, her concern quickly replaced by logistics. "Let me know where you're forwarding your mail. I need to know where to send tax documents." She didn't ask why I was restless or what was bothering me. She only asked about the administration of my absence. It was the confirmation I needed. She was more concerned with the inconvenience I posed to her own filing system than my emotional state. With the funds securely managed and the old life dissolving behind me, I made my one deliberate, life-altering purchase. I wasn't interested in flashy mansions or sports cars. I wanted a sanctuary. I used the trust to purchase a small, remote, but exquisitely built log cabin on a pristine lake in western Montana. It was completely off-grid, beautiful, and private. It was paid for with a single, massive wire transfer. The property was titled to a subsidiary LLC of the Mountain View Trust, ensuring I remained disconnected from the deed. The cabin was my destination, my terminus, my final port of call. I spent the final week purging my home of 40 years of memories. I kept only essentials: clothing, sentimental photos, my favorite books, and the tools I needed for a simple, self-sufficient life. Everything else, furniture, kitchenware, decades of accumulated possessions, was sold at an estate sale or donated. I kept the process quiet and contained, working only after dark or during the day when Clara was at work. The evening before I was scheduled to leave, I sat in my nearly empty living room, the echoes of my past life bouncing off the bare walls. I felt a surge of genuine grief for the father-daughter relationship I wished I'd had. I hadn't wanted to disappear completely, I had wanted to be valued. Since that wasn't possible, I chose freedom. I didn't call Clara. A phone call would lead to awkward tears, insincere promises, and a protracted, painful emotional entanglement. I wanted a clean cut. I found a plain, unlined notepad and wrote a final, short message. I left it conspicuously on the kitchen counter, next to a small, ceramic owl Clara had given me for my last birthday. "Clara, I've gone on my trip. My house sale is final. The new owners take possession tomorrow. I'm not sure when I'll be back or if I will. I'm taking this time for myself to clear my head and find some perspective. I wish you and Mark all the best in your life and with your careers. Please don't worry about me. I'll be fine." I folded the note, placed it under the ceramic owl, and looked around the empty room one last time. I walked out, locked the door for the last time, and climbed into my reliable 7-year-old Toyota Camry. It was the perfect escape vehicle, invisible, mundane, and paid for. As I pulled away from the curb and watched the silhouette of my old home shrink in the rearview mirror, I reached up and touched the inner zipper of my jacket pocket, where a burner phone and the papers detailing my new identity and fortune rested. The sting of being given the lottery ticket had been replaced by the quiet, absolute satisfaction of knowing I had used that very ticket to buy myself a whole new life, one they would never be able to access. I was no longer Arthur Davies, the overlooked father. I was the anonymous beneficiary of a spectacular fortune, and I was finally heading home. The road stretched out before me, leading directly into the mountains and the vast, unburdened silence I craved. The road trip was a deliberate act of decompression. I drove the old Toyota west and north, crossing state lines, the landscape transforming from the flat, predictable geography of the Midwest to the dramatic, rising foothills of the Rockies. Every mile was a physical and psychological separator. I was no longer the man tethered to the house I'd just sold, the job I'd quietly retired from, or the daughter whose casual dismissal had been the catalyst for this monumental change. I was simply Arthur, a man with a full tank of gas and an unimaginable fortune secured miles and lawyers away. I stuck to the rhythm of my old life, only slightly upgraded. I didn't check into luxury hotels. I stayed at clean, inexpensive motels, paying cash to maintain my anonymity. I ate simple meals at diners, enjoying the mundane, anonymous interactions. The true luxury wasn't the money itself, but the knowledge that I could do this, that I had the freedom to stop driving right now and buy the entire diner if the whim struck me. But I didn't want the diner, I wanted the quiet. After 4 days of solitude on the road, I crossed into Montana. The air immediately sharpened, carrying the clean, icy scent of pine and high elevation. The last leg of the journey was up a gravel Forest Service road, winding deep into the mountains. Finally, I reached a clearing. There it was, my new sanctuary. The cabin was perfection. It was built of dark, massive logs, nestled against a stand of towering lodgepole pines, and overlooked a glacial lake of impossible blue. It was remote, serene, and absolutely self-sufficient, powered by a discreet array of solar panels and heated by a magnificent stone hearth. The only sound was the wind through the pines and the distant, rhythmic lap of water against the shore. I spent the first few weeks establishing the new rhythm of my life. I organized my few belongings, chopped wood, fished the clear, cold lake, and simply sat on the porch, watching the sun track across the water. I read books I hadn't had time for in decades. I was not rich, I was simply free. The massive wealth was an inert, distant shield, allowing me to live a simple life without fear. Back in the suburbs, the effect of my sudden absence was unfolding slowly, precisely as I had predicted. Clara found the note the following morning when she stopped by to drop off a few items I'd forgotten and retrieve a spare key she needed. She read the plain note on the counter, "I've gone on my trip. I'm not sure when I'll be back or if I will," and her initial reaction was annoyance, not alarm. "Unbelievable," she muttered to Mark later that evening, tossing the crumpled note onto their dining table. "He just leaves? Sells the house to some cash buyer without telling me, and just drives off? He's such a drama queen lately. Honestly, he's probably just down in Florida visiting that cousin he hasn't seen in 20 years. Mark, ever the diplomat, was slightly more cautious. "It sounds like he's just going through a bit of a phase, honey. Retirement, I guess." He did seem a bit low on Father's Day. Low? He was fine. I gave him a stack of lottery tickets. He's just doing this for attention, I swear. He knows I have enough on my plate with the promotion and Robert's upcoming cruise, Clara said, already minimizing my departure into an inconvenience rather than a worry. My trip was simply another example of my inconvenient neediness, contrasting poorly with Robert's exciting, high-status activities. She tried calling my old phone number once. When the automated voice informed her the number had been disconnected at the customer's request, she huffed. "See? Just being dramatic. He's probably bought a new prepaid phone and just hasn't bothered to give me the number." She told herself this was typical Arthur, quietly unreliable. The initial days passed. Clara was too busy at her high-pressure marketing job and too focused on planning a going-away dinner for Robert and Eleanor's cruise to give my absence much thought. The fact that the new owners had moved in within a week confirmed her narrative. I was gone, and now she just had to deal with the administrative annoyance of my vanished mail and records. The first crack in her composure appeared 3 weeks after I left. Robert called Clara, specifically to thank her again for the cruise and to ask about me. "So, how's your dad enjoying his big trip, Clara? Where did he end up heading?" I wanted to send him a postcard from St. Thomas. Robert's casual inquiry hit a nerve. "Oh, he's, driving the coast, I think. He got a new phone, so he hasn't called," Clara lied, a small, cold knot tightening in her stomach. Robert paused. "A new phone? Sold his house? Clara, that's a big step for a man like Arthur. He always seems so steady. Did he seem okay financially? I hope he wasn't stressed." Robert's genuine concern, the concern of a man who valued stability and family, shook Clara. It made her realize that she hadn't given the why of my departure a single moment of genuine reflection. She had assumed the house sale was a financial necessity, but she hadn't even checked. That conversation forced her to stop and think. She realized she had literally zero contact information for her father. She couldn't forward the 2 pieces of junk mail that had shown up with her name on it. He had left no instructions, no emergency contact, no forwarding address. He had simply erased his digital and physical footprint. It was an odd, unsettling thought. My absence felt far more deliberate than any trip she or Mark would ever plan. They planned to go somewhere. I seemed to have planned to vanish. Sitting on the porch of my new cabin, staring at the vast, wild forest, I was perfectly aware of the time passing. I had checked in with Mr. Henderson, who confirmed that the payout was secure and that no one was asking difficult questions. I read the news on a secured tablet, occasionally glancing at the local paper from my old town. A small article confirmed that Robert and Eleanor Sterling had departed on their cruise, a glowing social mention of their well-deserved luxury vacation. And I, the man given the cheap $25 ticket, was sitting on $60 million cash, net of taxes, gazing at my own private, $1 million view, utterly unbound by the expectations of the world I had left. The true gift of the lottery ticket wasn't the money, but the permission it gave me to abandon a relationship that had become emotionally bankrupt. I had been secondary for so long. Now, I was the sole proprietor of my own existence, the primary character in my own story. And I would keep that peace at any cost. I picked up the last of the burner phones I had brought, turned it on, and used it to send one final, cryptic message, not to Clara, but to the legal office that handled my estate planning, giving them a single, critical instruction: send one postcard. Then I disassembled the phone, dropped the battery and SIM card into a secure disposal pouch, and tossed the plastic shell into my firewood pile. The last connection to my old life was severed. 6 months passed, marked by the slow, inexorable turning of the seasons in the outside world, yet standing still in the pristine, quiet bubble of my Montana sanctuary. My life had settled into a rhythm of solitude and self-sufficiency. I was insulated from the concerns of my former life, checking in only with Mr. Henderson, who provided clipped, professional updates on the trust's stellar performance and confirmed the continued success of my anonymity. I was financially richer than I had ever dreamed, but emotionally, I was simply at peace. Clara's growing unease. Back in the suburbs, the carefree confidence Clara had displayed 6 months prior had begun to fray, giving way to a gnawing, low-grade anxiety. Initially, her dismissal of my trip had been total. "He'll call when he needs something," she told Mark. "He's just flexing his independence." But as the weeks turned into months, her casual narrative began to crumble. Thanksgiving came and went without a word. Christmas, a time when I had always, without fail, appeared with a modest gift and a willingness to help, passed in complete silence. Clara was now actively trying to track me down, but her efforts were clumsy and panicked. She searched online directories for my name and phone number, all dead ends. She tried calling my old bank, impersonating me to get transaction details, but they politely refused, citing privacy laws. All she found was a void, a clean, silent space where my life used to be. The clean house sale, the disconnected phone, the utter lack of a forwarding address, it all pointed not to a spontaneous trip, but to a meticulously planned erasure. Her anxiety wasn't born of deep, selfless love, but of a realization of vulnerability. The father she had casually neglected was now completely unaccounted for, and the thought that something might have happened was slowly being replaced by the chilling fear that she didn't care enough to know. The guilt was starting to surface, sharp and cold, a foreign sensation to her self-assured world. The turning point came in late December, just before Christmas. Robert and Eleanor Sterling, tanned and refreshed, returned from their luxurious 7-day Caribbean cruise, their heads full of elegant dining and azure seas, the very gift that had highlighted the disparity in Clara's affection months prior. They came over for a celebratory dinner, bringing Clara and Mark an expensive set of etched glassware from St. Lucia. Robert was expansive, full of goodwill, and genuinely delighted with his daughter-in-law. "Clara, my dear, that cruise was simply divine," Robert boomed, raising his glass. "The best gift we've ever received. I can't thank you enough for the thoughtfulness." Clara managed a tight, strained smile. The compliment was a dagger. The contrast between her grand gesture to Robert and the $25 scratch-off to me felt like a physical weight she now carried. After dinner, Robert cornered Clara in the kitchen, a genuine concern etched on his usually jovial face. "Clara, dear, forgive me for asking, but I haven't heard anything about your father," Robert said, his voice dropping to a serious, low tone. "I know he was planning a long trip. I called his old number several times, thinking I'd wish him a Merry Christmas before we left, but it was disconnected. Did he ever settle down? Did he move nearby?" Clara felt a profound sense of shame. "I don't know, Robert. He sold his house so fast. He just left a note saying he was going to clear his head. I haven't heard a word since Father's Day." Robert's shock was genuine and immediate. He was a man who valued family structure and responsibility. 6 months? Not a single call? "Clara, that's not like Arthur. He's always been very grounded, very dependable. A man doesn't just sell his house and cut off all communication unless something is deeply wrong, or unless he is making a deliberate break." Robert paused, his expression shifting to one of serious contemplation. "Have you checked with the police? Have you filed a missing persons report? I'm truly worried about him, Clara. That's a drastic move for a man his age." Robert's genuine alarm, the sheer, unfeigned fatherly concern from the man she had tried to impress, was the final, devastating blow to Clara's fragile composure. It was her father-in-law, the recipient of her highest affections, who was forcing her to acknowledge the depth of her neglect. Robert's kindness toward a man he barely knew highlighted her own cold indifference toward her own father. Later that night, the conversation with Robert haunting her, Clara descended into full-blown panic. She didn't sleep. Instead, she sat at her computer, revisiting the events of the last 6 months, her mind racing. The cruise. The scratch-offs. The note. The silence. The police had already told her that as an adult who voluntarily sold his home, I wasn't technically missing. She hit a wall of frustration. Where does a man just vanish to? In a desperate, frantic search for any digital footprint, she typed Arthur Davies' house sold and missing person into the search bar, trying every combination of keywords. She scrolled through pages of local news archives from the time of my departure. And then a small, unassuming headline from a local online news portal caught her eye, dated 2 weeks after Father's Day. Local man wins $120 million mega jackpot. Winner claims prize under anonymous trust. The article was short, carefully worded to protect the identity of the winner, who had claimed the $60 million cash lump sum via a legal entity named the Mountain View Trust. The final paragraph, however, contained 2 critical, non-identifying details. The winning ticket was purchased at a gas station near the winner's residential county. The winner, a man in his 60s, reportedly used a single, old-fashioned, lucky copper penny to scratch the winning numbers. Clara froze. The air in her lungs felt suddenly thin and metallic. The gas station near her house. A man in his 60s. A single, old-fashioned, lucky penny. She remembered the crumpled envelope. She remembered the $20 million mega jackpot ticket, the most expensive one in the pack. She remembered the distinct coppery gleam of my old, worn penny, which I always carried. A wave of nausea washed over her. It wasn't just a trip, it wasn't a midlife crisis. It was the $120 million. The scratch-off ticket, the cheapest, most dismissive gift she could have given, had been the key to an impossible fortune. And in my quiet, overlooked manner, I had cashed it in and used it to buy my way out of her life. The full, devastating scope of her mistake, of her casual indifference, hit her with the force of a physical blow. She hadn't been worried about a missing father. She had missed out on the greatest lottery win in the state's history. And worse, she had been the direct, inadvertent instrument of his escape. Suddenly, the cold truth of my cryptic note became clear. I hadn't gone to clear my head. I had gone to enjoy my $120 million freedom, and I hadn't told her because I hadn't wanted the chaos she would bring. She finally understood. I hadn't left because I was in trouble. I had left because I was rich enough not to need her anymore. Her frantic search shifted from missing person to Mountain View Trust lawyer. She had to know. The cold light of the computer screen illuminated Clara's face, reflecting the stark, devastating truth. I hadn't simply left. I had performed a brilliant, surgical act of self-extrication, enabled by her own careless generosity. The $120 million mega jackpot was not just a fortune. It was my golden parachute out of her indifferent life. The immediate shock was superseded by a desperate, frantic scramble to confirm the impossible. She reread the news article about the Mountain View Trust winner, focusing on every minute detail. A man in his 60s purchased the ticket locally, used an old copper penny. All evidence pointed to me. The very details she had once ignored, my predictable habits, my love for that useless penny, were now the damning proof of my triumph and her loss. Clara's anxiety shifted from vague worry about my safety to an intense, frantic effort to reclaim my attention and, by extension, my wealth. She started where her research had led her. The lawyer mentioned in the financial section of the article, a man named Mr. Henderson. She spent the next day making a series of increasingly aggressive phone calls to his office. First call, "My name is Clara Sterling. I believe my father, Arthur Davies, is the beneficiary of your client, the Mountain View Trust. I need to speak to him." The receptionist was polite, practiced, and firm. I'm sorry, Miss Sterling, but we cannot confirm or deny the identity of any client, particularly one represented by a blind trust. I can take a message, but client confidentiality is absolute. Second call, to Mr. Henderson directly. Clara used her professional voice, attempting to leverage her own corporate background. Mr. Henderson, I am Mr. Davies's next of kin. I have reason to believe he is in some form of distress, and that this trust is perhaps a consequence of undue influence. Henderson's voice, when he returned the call an hour later, was cool, clinical, and impenetrable. Miss Sterling, I can assure you that the beneficiary of the Mountain View Trust is a mentally competent individual who engaged our services with full knowledge and intent. All our actions are legally sound. We have documented proof of their sound mental and emotional state at the time of the claim. Furthermore, we are explicitly instructed not to disclose the identity or location of our client to any party, including family members. Any further attempts to contact us with the intent of breaching client confidentiality will be logged as harassment. The door was slammed shut. The fortress of my anonymity, built with my wealth and Henderson's expertise, was unbreachable. There was no leverage, no legal footing, no argument she could make. The law was on the side of the man who had the foresight to protect himself. Clara was forced to confront the agonizing reality. The father she had neglected was now a millionaire, and she was locked outside the gates of his new life. The fact that the money had come from a gift she had chosen out of duty and cheapness made the emotional turmoil unbearable. She had bought the cruise for Robert to signal her success. She had bought the lottery ticket for me to signal her dismissal. The universe, in its coldest irony, had honored both signals. The memory of Father's Day became a constant, painful loop in her mind. She recalled the gleaming, expensive paper around Robert's cruise brochure, the excitement in his voice, the pride she felt in her own generosity. She then remembered the small, crumpled envelope, the impatient flick of her wrist as she handed me the tickets, the lie I told about a nice dinner out. She recognized now that I hadn't been testing her. I had simply accepted my place as the low-effort obligation. My subsequent disappearance wasn't betrayal, it was vindication. My silence was the most expensive, devastating statement I could have made. I no longer need your attention, your approval, or your affection. Mark tried to comfort her, but the unspoken truth hung heavy between them. Robert had returned with postcards and expensive gifts. I had vanished with a fortune. Clara's hierarchy of affection had been exposed as profoundly flawed. We have to track him down, Clara, Mark urged, seeing his wife dissolve under the pressure. He's still your father. He can't just. He can, Mark, she choked out, running her hands through her hair. He legally can. He planned this. He knew exactly what he was doing. He used that money to buy silence from us. He bought his freedom. About a month later, just as Clara was sinking into a pit of despair, the mail arrived. Tucked between junk flyers and bills was a single, thick, high-quality postcard. It wasn't a cheap tourist print. The image on the front was a stunning photograph. A vast, pristine lake ringed by tall, dark pines, with jagged, snow-capped mountains rising in the background. The scene was utterly remote, wild, and untouched. It was a picture of perfect, profound peace. The postcard was addressed to Clara and Mark Sterling at their home address. The stamp was from Montana. Clara's hands trembled as she flipped it over. The handwriting, though slightly shaky, was unmistakably mine. The neat, practical script of a man who wrote checks and budget figures. Dear Clara, having a wonderful time. I found my own little cruise. The view is magnificent and the air is clean. I'm doing exactly what I set out to do, clearing my head and finding perspective. Take care. But there was no return address, just the postmark from a tiny town in the Rocky Mountain range. Clara stared at the phrase, I found my own little cruise. The words were a direct, stinging callback to the lavish gift she had given Robert, a devastating confirmation that he knew exactly the contrast she had drawn between the two fathers. He wasn't just wealthy, he was deliberate. He had taken his $120 million and used it to sail away from her emotional coast, leaving her stranded on the shore of her own regret. The postcard wasn't a plea for reconciliation or an opening for a reunion. It was a closing statement. It was proof that he was safe, well, and financially independent, and that the only thing he had lost in the process was his need for her. Clara finally wept, not tears of worry or greed, but tears of pure, unadulterated shame. She had given her father-in-law a week of luxury. She had given her own father a $120 million ticket to irreversible freedom. And she knew, looking at the image of that vast, serene lake, that she had permanently lost her place in the life of the man she had so casually dismissed. The man she had thought was a simple footnote had written the grandest chapter of all, and she was not invited to read it. The final postcard, a beautiful, silent testament to a life reborn, closed the chapter on Arthur Davies's old life. He had used the most insignificant gift to purchase the most significant prize: anonymity and self-determination. For Clara, the devastating realization was not just the loss of the money, but the absolute confirmation of her father's choice. He hadn't been stolen by circumstance or crisis. He had simply chosen to be rich, quiet, and profoundly free, a freedom she had inadvertently handed him. The magnificent cruise was forgotten, overshadowed by the unshakable truth that Arthur's quiet escape was the most expensive and deliberate gesture of all.